Welcome to this Killik Explains video, and welcome to a topic that I think is worth revisiting in the summer of 2024 with everything that's going on in the UK at the moment, and that is how to build wealth successfully, the core principles. Now, let's start with why we're doing it. Why should we have a mindset that tries to set aside jam for tomorrow and not just spend and eat and consume jam today, if you like? Well, there are 4 reasons. And I give a lot more detail on all 4 in the front of every single one of my how-to guides. More details at the end of the video, but they are choice, independence, for young people from parents, for example, security, if things go wrong, and long-term peace of mind. The possibility you could even hand some of your wealth on to future generations. So give them security, not just you. So how are we going to do this? And essentially, it won't surprise you to learn that the route I'm proposing is most of us will be earning money over a working career, either employed or self-employed. And what we want to do is to boost basically the amount potentially that we can set aside for the future by using a combination of saving and investing plus compound growth. The alternatives are to marry money, not a great idea. Inherit it, definitely not a great idea to sort of sit around expecting money to come in that route. Win it, pure gamble, or steal it, which no one's suggesting you do. So, given what we're going to try and do is earn it and invest it, what are the rules? Well, first thing to say is it isn't easy. All right, some of the things I'm going to suggest are very straightforward to write down, not so easy to do in practice, but keep the approach simple, follow my 3 guiding rules, if you like, and it becomes a little more manageable. And basically those are: spend less than you earn, so generate something you can save and invest with, then put it to work earning decent real returns, coming back to that in a moment, and thirdly, don't blow it. In other words, manage your emotions as you go. As humans, we're hardwired to do some things which are not always helpful when it comes to long-term wealth building. So, taking those in turn, spending less than you earn. Now, some trite statements coming up here, but they're important ones. When you're young in particular, work as hard as you can, because once a career ends, that's kind of that. Yes, you might be able to dial down, do consultancy, do something else, but essentially when you're young, energetic, or you've got maximum firepower mentally, work as hard as you can. Yes, enjoy life too, but don't undercommit to the right job and the opportunity to build wealth early, because the point about compounding is the earlier you start letting your investments grow, the better the end result. Point 2 within this: spend carefully. All right, identify what's important to you. Is it assets? I mean, everyone needs a home arguably, but is it pure assets? Some people do get a kick out of that. Is it experiences? Prioritize. You can't do it all, okay? And to help you, set a budget and then use it. A budget is not a sort of work of art that you create and then stuff in a drawer. It is actually a sort of live document. So every month, keep track of how much you're earning, how much you're spending, what sort of gap there is, positive or negative, and what you could do to manage the gap. In other words, is there what I call discretionary spending you could cut back on, and as part of that, be your own boss. Don't get dragged into following the herd. Don't get dragged into spending like other people. Spend the way you want to. And the more discipline you impose early, the easier that gets. Next, try and generate real returns. So the point of the last point was to say, try and maximize the amount you might have available to save. Now get it working hard. And real returns are post-inflation. So very crudely, if inflation is 2%, you need to be earning at least that on your investments, and ideally by a decent margin, if you're factoring in things like tax and costs, so that you do better than just break even. All right. And worse, if your returns slip below inflation, you're actually losing money in real terms, and that's no good. So where are we going to do this? And I've covered this in other videos. What are the options? Cash. Everybody needs some cash. Rainy day funds, those foreseeable calls on capital. I've talked about those in other videos, but the reality is, other than over very short periods, which usually kinks in the market, if you like, it's unlikely that the interest you earn on cash, especially after tax, will be enough to take care of inflation. So where else can we go? Well, bonds are a potentially good bet. Even if prices are not going in the right direction by falling, yields are potentially inflation busting. depending on which part of the market you look at. Shares, we know, have demonstrated over decades their ability to beat inflation. All right, that's not to say that the past is a reliable guide to the future, especially in the short term, but over the long term, shares have pretty much proven their case, if you like. And then there's property. Got to be honest, property used to be a way for some investors to make quite a bit of money. Last decade, where I live in London, prices haven't really moved at all. So I suspect some people have actually lost money in real, that's post-inflation terms, which is why I never sit here and recommend property investment per se. It only suits a relatively small number of people. Property is something to live in my opinion. Even share, if you can afford to, in the form of a holiday home with family and friends, for example, or by supporting kids, but it's not really in the same bracket as other investments, unless you know quite a bit about it. So overall here, in this quest to generate real returns, we're going to be investing in a portfolio, let's say, made up predominantly for long-term purposes of shares and maybe bonds too, all right, with some emergency cash set aside. And what we're going to try and do is harness compound growth over as long a period as possible and make it tax efficient. Don't forget, where possible, to shelter this wealth you're building inside things like ISAs, self-invested personal pensions, and so on. Now, point 3 was manage your emotions. Now, I have talked about this in more detail in other videos, but I mean, really, really simple emotion management, if you like, is getting the balance between greed and fear correct. Famously, investors have been described as either greedy or fearful. The problem with greed is it can lead you to just take far too much risk. Single stock investing, cryptocurrencies. That's not a good idea as a long-term investment. But fear can lead people to sit on the sidelines in cash, worried, anxious, nervous, and lose out potentially on much better inflation-beating returns. So there's a balance to be achieved there. And sort of key questions on this third point that it's worth thinking about in terms of getting the balance right. How much cash do I actually need? And that's very personal. We recommend someone without a family, maybe 3 to 6 months of your expenditure set aside, 6 to 12 with a family. But frankly, that number will vary according to personal preference. Think about, what am I going to do if I get sick long term or lose my job? What sort of cover do I have there? Is cash going to be enough? And then when it comes to investments, it's very easy to say, what would you do if the market dropped 20% tomorrow? Not suggesting it will, but if it did, what would you do? And what people tend to do is say, I would hold firm, Tim, because that's what I've been told to do. But would you? If that were to happen, you've got to be honest with yourself and say, would I panic? Because if you panic and just bail out of the market, which is a mistake in my opinion, then maybe you need to reset your investment strategy, so that the risk of a drop like that is somewhat mitigated. And then finally, if you're thinking this sounds quite complicated actually, there's a final question to ask yourself. Should I be doing all this? Or should I hand it over to somebody else? Right? Somebody else who can essentially identify the amount I've got available to save, generate real returns as far as possible, and not fall into those kind of emotional bias traps. Okay, so there you have it. That's this week's video. If you want to find out more, there are plenty of other videos at the resources hub of the website. That's killik.com. Copies of my guide, which I mentioned earlier, or guides, I should say. Here's one, how to invest in equities. And of course, the quarterly magazine, Confidant.